This is Charter California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. Our guest today, Tom Torlakson. He is the Superintendent of Public Instruction for the great state of California. Sir, thank you for joining us. And fortunately, there's good news when it comes to education in our great state as it relates to graduation. Despite the budget crises, we'll talk about those. What's the good news in terms of graduation rates?
Well, the good news is teachers, administrators, parents, students are focusing more on achieving better in math and science, better in language arts, and the graduation rates have been going up. They've been passing the CASE, the high school exit exam, and getting the credits to go on to college and to have, you know, a better start in life. The graduation rates are going up and the dropout rates are going down.
And some of the best news in this report that was issued by your department deals with those students of color, because we know that we have seen an achievement gap,
right,
and we can talk about that. But when you look at graduation rates, English language learners, Hispanics, and African Americans, they're actually graduating at a higher percentage vis-a-vis the overall benefit in the graduation rate.
Right, there was a differential gain, and that was welcome. It was overdue. So, for instance, with English learners, a 4% drop in the dropout rate and a 3.8% increase in graduation rate. So, this is part of this achievement gap that's got to be closed. You know, when you have 24% of your students in the state dropping out, that's not good for the economy. It's not good for our society. And so, we're making progress in the right direction.
So, why is this happening? What's going right?
I think it's been a keen focus. The legislature, my department, my focus has been, we have a disgraceful dropout rate. It's dreadful.
Right.
That's a waste of human potential. Let's focus on the positive and get more students ready to graduate. Our economy needs it, and these students need a strong future. At
the same time, though, while the dropout rate is decreasing among students of color, we do know that the achievement gap is still problematic. Right. A report came out recently, California District Report Cards. Not one school received an A in terms of the achievement gap. Most school districts achieved C's and D's. Why? What's going wrong?
Well, a couple of things that can address this. One is we know summer learning loss is taking place, and that's equivalent to maybe 1/2 of the entire achievement gap is due to the fact that summer school has been reduced and low-income children don't have family camps, family vacations, getaways, science camp during the summer. So they're learning languages. They lose 2 months of the prior 9 months of learning. We also, among many low-income children in California, are having a chronic absenteeism rate of about 20% in kindergarten. That means those students will miss a whole year of education by the time they're in 8th grade. Those are differentially students of color from lower income neighborhoods in the state.
At the same time, we have seen the school year cut year after year. In LAUSD, for example, it's been cut 18 days since 2008. How does that impact students of color and, frankly, all students?
Well, it affects every single student in California. It's the wrong direction. California now has one of the lowest investments per student of any of the states. I think we're 47th in the nation. That's a disgrace in itself.
But here's what's confusing to me. I think about California. We are the Golden State. And then I think about the tri-state area in New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. They have their challenges. They faced recession, yet their students continue to perform. Their budgets are not being slashed like ours are. Their public schools are the crown jewel of the nation. If they can do it, why can't we?
Well, we can, and I believe California has had that position in the past, being a nation leader, one of the top quality education systems, and we have to go back to that.
But aside
what's happened in
please.
recent years is gridlock in Sacramento politics. In many cases, the Democrats and Republicans aren't agreeing on the priority or how to raise the money necessary to keep the schools going. The per pupil investment in some of those states you named is $14,000, $15,000, $16,000 per pupil. We're about $8,000, $9,000 per pupil.
But why? I mean, they've had Republican governors and Democratic legislatures. We've had the same. Right now we have Democrats controlling both sides of Capitol Hill, metaphorically speaking.
Right. We're investing far less in state taxes into education than we did and into state services than we did 10 years ago. So I think that's part of it, is there was the termination of the so-called car tax. There were some other reductions. So it blew big holes in the budget. Other states didn't have that rollback of existing taxes. They've kept their tax level steady.
So why is it, though, that we are called a high-tax state? We have higher income taxes, higher sales tax. I know that we're not amongst the highest, that, you know, somewhat mythical, but, you know, our sales tax is almost 10%. Our income taxes, you know, some of these states don't even have income taxes in New England.
Well, on a comparison basis, actually, California is in the mid-pack. It's it's about 19th in the level of taxation. We used to be closer up to 9th or 10th in the level of taxation. So, you know, part of what's happening in the fiscal crisis is government is reorganizing its priorities, cutting out fat, duplicative bureaucracy, taking out antiquated programs. So there's been a crunch. $40 billion have been cut from the state budget. Now it's time to rebuild. I think we have to reinvest in our schools and bring back some of the dollars to education.
Are we spending too much focus, too much time, too much money on prisons? I mean, I understand we spend more on prisons than schools today.
We have a large prison population, a large recidivism, which just keeps the population very costly, keeps it going. We have seen the legislature in the past few years let go about 20,000 inmates back to the community.
Well, the Supreme Court of the United States told them they have to.
That part of it is the overcrowding, absolutely, and then the move by Governor Brown to move a big chunk of the prisoner population to the locals. But still in all, the California voter has voted time and again to have tough on crime measures, and frankly, safety's gone up as
crime rate's down.
Crime rate is down. So it was a choice by California voters, and I think we both know that one of the best things to fight crime is a good education and a sense of a future for a young person.
So let's talk about a good education and talk about a ballot initiative that we'll see in November. It's called Proposition 30. It is the governor's ballot initiative. It would increase sales tax by 1/4 cent for 4 years, increase taxes on the wealthy for 7 years. Currently, it's leading in the polls. It's over 50%. So is the cigarette tax that passed or did not pass in June. So what do you make of Proposition 30?
Well, I like it. I support it. I hope it wins. I believe it is time to invest. I said when I ran for the office of superintendent, I would support any ballot measure that would invest large amount of dollars into education as a priority. So it will save devastating cuts. If it doesn't pass, we face 30 less school days, 6 weeks less.
Now, you believe it's up to, because I had heard 15 or 3 weeks.
It's now up to 6 weeks over 2 years.
So
it's three weeks per year. But think about that. What do we do with 6 1/3 million children who don't have school for an additional 3 to 4 weeks per year? But this is not wise.
But here's the frustration. I think the voters understand that, but when they hear that the Parks Department found $54 million, or they hear that the Department of Mental Health has found $750 million, it's frustrating. And what they say is, I don't want to give them any more money. But yet it's the children that may suffer if you believe the situation as it is.
And that was deplorable that money was not known, that money, the parks money was there and not accounted for. That has to be corrected. The various state oversights need to really get on top of that, and I know the governor's made a pledge to get on top of that. And yet the park money can't be used to fund the schools. So there are special funds, they need to be accounted for, but it does fuel some cynicism out there, and that's why we have a large challenge to say, this is going for the kids, it's for our future.
As the state's top official in education, will you be over the next few months getting out to the voters and saying, I want you to vote for Proposition 30? I mean, you will have sway. I mean, if you believe strongly enough, you will have sway.
Well, I'm passionate about it. It's my top priority. I am around the state sharing that message. It's time to invest. It's time to reinvest. And it is for a brighter future for our economy and for our children.
But what about in the Inland Empire or in Imperial County, where that's where you need the votes? I mean, sure, San Francisco and LA will probably vote yes, but are you talking to the voters that can be convinced?
I think so. I mean, I was in Rialto yesterday. I was in San Bernardino. I was in Ontario, and so I'm traveling, and I'm wanting also to put a spotlight on all the good things. School districts are saving hundreds of millions of dollars in business efficiencies they've now discovered.
They're trying.
There's really great success in many of our schools.
Superintendent, thank you for joining us. When we come back, we'll be speaking with the Dean of the College of Education at Cal State LA. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition.
Of the 10 largest school districts in California, which district faced the highest percentage dropout rate in 2011? The San Bernardino Unified School District faced the highest percentage dropout rate in 2011 at 27.6%.
California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest is Mary Falvey. She is the Dean of the College of Education at Cal State Los Angeles, which means you teach the teachers.
That's correct.
And what's interesting about your college is it's unique amongst colleges. Explain.
So we are a charter college of education. We were given a charter status 15 years ago, and that gave us the opportunity to operate outside of some of the bureaucratic structures that inhibit innovation, creation.
So it's like a charter school when we think of public schools.
In some ways it is.
How did that happen?
Well, at that time, Barry Munitz was the chancellor of the CSU system, the California State University system, and he proposed it to the president of our campus, who was very enthusiastic, and the then dean of education at Cal State LA. So we applied for it, and we've continued to reapply and put ourselves forth as a way to think about the preparation of teachers in a more innovative way.
And I want to talk about our teachers because it's an interesting time when you think about how teachers are being perceived by the public. We all love our own teacher, but yet in the public arena there's a lot of bashing of teachers' unions. You think about in many school districts, teachers will get tenure after 2 years. I think that's actually a state law now. Talk to me about how that has played out for you as the Dean of the College of Education and for upcoming teachers.
So what we've seen is a tremendous decline in those interested in coming into teaching. And teacher bashing is only one of several factors, I think, that have influenced the decrease in teachers.
And actually the Dean brought us some charts. We love charts. This is figure 9, if I may say. And we look at the total enrollment of individuals looking towards teaching as a career. The drop-off is quite dramatic over the last 5 years. What is it?
We've seen a 45% decline, and this is not just at Cal State LA. This is actually
statewide.
Private and public institutions in California. We've seen a decline of about 45% of people coming into teaching.
And if you think about it, it's really not that surprising when you consider that over the last 5 years, and even beyond this chart, we've seen increasing layoffs. We've seen teacher pay docked. It's really quite daunting. I mean, I have an aunt who was laid off. And, you know, when you have rules in place that are, for example, last in, first out, I mean, look, at some level we do want to honor those with longer careers, but some of those younger teachers, they're young, they're vibrant, they're excited, they're energetic, and they're gone.
Yes, yes. And I think the other issue that surfaces is that because of the decline in funding for public schools, we've seen teachers being laid off, not necessarily because they're the last in, but because we've increased class sizes. So we just don't see as large of a teaching force, and so therefore there's not a need for as many teachers at this moment in time.
I want to talk about that class size issue because throughout the last 20 years, I think a lot of us felt as if California was still struggling, had been struggling in terms of education as a result of Prop 13 or whatever it may be. But the one thing we can always point to is that we had a up to 20 maximum K through 5,
third grade.
K through 3. And that was like, you know what, we still got that. It's just fine. And that's gone.
It's gone. It's gone.
What happened?
Well, basically, it's the funding formula that has decreased to each of the individual school districts, and they've had to make decisions about how to make sure that they're funding enough resources. So when class size actually came into bear is when California experienced a huge increase in the need for teachers and therefore hired teachers on emergency waivers,
which is controversial in itself.
Exactly, and that wasn't in the long run. That wasn't necessarily the solution to an opportunity for kids to get a larger, better, more individualized education.
And yet what's interesting is we have pulled back on emergency credentials, and yet Figure 1 shows us that total teaching credentials issued in California significantly down over the last 5 years.
Yeah, and the concern I have is that we see a huge number of teachers in the school system that are on the verge of retirement.
Right.
And I'm concerned that if we dry up the pipeline, you know, for the new prospective candidates coming in, that we won't be able to meet the demand in the next 5 to 10 years to fill those positions that teachers are retiring in.
Of course.
And so
I want to ask you about the length of the school year.
Okay.
We know that in California, and let's talk about LAUSD for example, since 2008-2009, the school year has been cut 18 days. How has that, I mean, other than the obvious, what is the impact of that?
Well, the impact is going to be that teachers are going to probably hold the burden of responsibility for the impact of that again. So again, more teacher bashing around. We're not going to have as many instructional days for the students to learn the content and the knowledge base. So when it comes to assessing their skills, at the end of the day, they're not going to do as well. We don't expect them to do as well because we haven't got enough instructional time.
Now, I know you're not a politician, you're not an elected official, but that being said, as you know, on the ballot in November is an initiative. It's now called Proposition 30, supported by the governor. And it would increase sales tax by 1/4 cent for 4 years, increase taxes on the wealthy for 7 years. A very significant portion of that will go to education, K-14, as well as CSU and UC. To the extent you're willing to say what your thoughts are on Prop 30, please.
Well, I think we have to just take a look at the decreases in access to education, public education in California, to recognize that we're a different state than we used to be. You know, in the years when I was growing up, and I'm sure you were growing up, we had a public school system that we could be be proud of and know that our kids were getting what they needed in order to be successful adults. That's been pulled back significantly.
If Prop 30 does not pass, what the governor has said, what school officials have said, they will be forced to cut the school year another 15 days or 3 weeks. What will that do to public education in California?
I'm convinced that children will not be given the opportunity to learn the standards for their grade level, their subject areas that they're assigned to at this point. And we will once again be preparing kids who will not be prepared for either the workforce or for going on to higher education. And I think we really have to take a look at the impact on the economy in the long run.
I also think about the fact that California has become a wonderfully diverse state. So many different languages are spoken in California. When you think about Southern California, for example, a lot of Latin immigrants, Asian immigrants. In Northern California, a lot of Asian immigrants. What do we see in terms of English language development for teachers, those that are looking to go into that area?
So we have been working really hard at examining our own practices at the university to really try alternative methods to ensure that our candidates leave us and have the skills to accept students and move them no matter where they are in the English language development spectrum. Because we have students that are brand new immigrants that haven't learned very much English and everything in between.
And what we see from Figure 12, Table 12, is hasn't been that successful.
Yeah, yeah.
The numbers are, I mean, to say you've had a drop-off, in 2007, almost 10,000. In 2010-11, not even 400. Madam Dean, what are we going to do?
Well, what we need to do is to take a look at the population of students and recognize that we have to individualize. We have to make sure we come to the table and bring those strategies that are effective for those students. But at the same time, we also have to recognize that the larger the class sizes go, the less likely teachers can do that.
In our final moments, if someone who is watching is interested in becoming a teacher, even in these difficult times, what would you tell them?
I would say, go, become a teacher. You're going to get a job, maybe not immediately, because immediately we don't see a lot of teaching positions open, but we do recognize that there's about 55,000 teachers in California who are over the age of 55. So we expect those teachers over the next 5 to 10 years to be going into their retirement years, and there will be openings. And so if you have a love for teaching, go into teaching. What we tell our students who don't get teaching jobs at the end of their program, look at after-school programs, look at tutoring programs.
And it will happen.
Stay in the field.
Mary Falvey, I thank you for joining us. Dean of the College of Education at Cal State LA, I'm Brad Pomerance. Thanks for watching Charter California Edition.
In 2011, what was the average compensation for a public school teacher in California? $57,000, $65,000, $67,000 or $72,000. The average teacher salary in 2011 was $67,000, a drop of 0.1% from 2010.
Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest today is Don Knabe. He's a member of the Board of Supervisors in Los Angeles County. And sir, I want to speak with you about term limits. It seems as if the voters of this state are taking a turn on their view of term limits. In the 1990s, there was a wave of term limits imposed on cities, on state, on counties. Lately, we have seen a different tact. LA City extended their term limits. The voters just in June changed the term limit formula for the state to allow members of the Assembly and Senate to serve 12 years total. It came up in the Board of Supervisors. Quite controversial.
Oh, very controversial because obviously the editorials have said it was self-serving and things like that. From my perspective, I mean, I've never supported term limits. I come from a city of Cerritos, that had one of the first term limits imposed back in the 80s. And it wasn't, but it didn't have the death knell in it. In other words, you could sit on the council for 8 years, wait 2 years, and come back and run again.
And so what was being proposed by your colleague Mike Antonovich is that members could serve, it's up to 5 terms, is that right?
Right. Right now the term limits are 3 terms, and this would allow 2 additional terms, up to 5 terms, so 20 years. And 20 years is a long time. I mean, I don't have a problem with that, but I just don't believe in term limits.
Now, what's interesting is it went up for a vote recently, and it did not pass. It needed 3 votes. It got 2. It got 1 no vote and 2 abstentions.
Right.
It's amazing how much attention got paid to this issue. Like you said, the editorial board, specifically the LA Times, went after term limits and the proposal with a vengeance. Why do you think there was so much consternation over this issue?
Well, whenever you put term limits on the ballot, it usually passes in some form or another. I think, you know, there's this whole thing about transparency and good government and, you know, movement of people. But I speak to the issue from term limits that I think we have term limits with the voters. In other words, if the voters want to remove you from office, they can. And to just to put some limit when there may be some folks that are doing a good job, you would like them to stick around for a while. What we've lost in the state of California due to term limits is any sense of history or continuity. They are doing day-to-day kinds of things that boards of supervisors, city councils should be doing, and there's no vision for this state.
Well, what's interesting is hearing that from you, I think, is powerful. I think it's fair to say that it was the Republican Party that spearheaded the drive for term limits.
Absolutely.
And you're a member of the Republican Party. And more importantly, though, you are also being joined by other Republicans speaking out against term limits. I mean, there really has been a sea change on the view of term limits.
I think there has. I don't think it's overwhelming yet. I'm not sure that even if we would have got the 5 terms on the ballot that it would have passed, but I think it would have been closer than in the past because, you know, when you sort of get the representative kind of government, the Board of Supervisors, regardless of all our problems we have from time to time, we work very well together, and it's not a partisan kind of an issue in solving problems, and we're much better shape financially than other local governments or local entities.
What about the view that without term limits, the incumbents have a huge advantage because they are able to raise the money, they are able to maintain name ID, and the only way to get new blood in is through a term limit?
I mean, that could be true. Again, my issue there being is that, yeah, if you want new blood, then you get rid of the existing one. Mm-hmm. To be force-fed out of office, I just think is almost unconstitutional. But again, from my perspective, I know when it's time to go and when, you know, those kinds of things. But you know, maybe there are people that want to stick around forever and ever. I'm not one of those. But I really think it's the voters' responsibility to whether or not they want you in office.
So do you think that this particular measure could come back, Mr. Antonovich's member, to extend?
Well, it could always come back. I mean, whether there's only one more opportunity to vote on it prior to November to put it on the November ballot, but it could be, you know, 2 years. It could be, you know, right. It could always come back. And I think statewide, you're starting to look at the whole issue of term limits and the impact. You know, some people throw back at me, well, look at Congress. There's no term limits. When you look at Congress, you got the partisanship, but you've got the South versus the North versus the West versus the East, which is totally different than the partisanship that you have.
And what's also interesting about the federal Congress is so much of the Congress runs on seniority. So if only one state imposed term limits on itself, it would really throw that seniority notion, and it could be a disadvantage to that state.
I mean, again, you look at the Board of Supervisors, within 24 months, they're going to have 4 new members, and then we're going to have 1 member left with 1 term left. There's the history. The history is in those 4 members.
Well, I mean, you talk about
with no opportunity to do that, and so you might. My concern is that the people that run for the office, it's going to be a Donnybrook, obviously, because it is a good job and one where you can make a difference. But if the people that run on a single issue that has no vision, the next thing you know, you get involved in, instead of fixing problems, you get involved in that single issue. And that's the concern that I have, because county government's big government.
Well, think about the county of Los Angeles, 10 million people.
Right, we're the largest county in America.
If it were a state, it'd be the size, I think, even bigger than Michigan.
Right, it's between Ohio and Michigan.
So, you know, and if you look at Sacramento, I mean, people much smarter than I have said that term limits really could be one of the main reasons for the dysfunction that we see.
Well,
there.
absolutely. I mean, you go back to when you had Willie Brown as speaker, and everybody disliked Willie at times, but you know, you could work with Willie, and his word was gold. Now you become speaker, and the day after you become speaker, somebody's trying to cut your legs off to become the next speaker.
Right.
And so even within your own party, you've got issues up there.
Are you hopeful, though, that with the change in term limits in Sacramento, allowing one individual to serve 12 years in one house, do you think that will be?
No, I don't think it'll make any difference.
You still think it's a problem?
Still a problem.
Okay, I want to shift gears and talk about municipal bankruptcies. As you know, in the state of California, as we speak, 3 cities have filed bankruptcies. These are not, 2 of them are not small cities. Stockton, San Bernardino, Mammoth Lake's a smaller city. What do you make of that? I mean, very scary times.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think a lot has to do with the unwinding of redevelopment agencies. I mean, I think that's going to have a big impact, I mean, now, immediately, as well as in the future. I think you need to sort of separate. Stockton as a very significant financial issue, but that sort of was a housing boom up there where they annexed property and they had all this inventory. Mammoth Lake's a little bit different.
They had a bank. They had a judgment.
Right, a judgment where the city council has changed the vote and redevelopment. San Bernardino, I think, has more than anything to do with the loss of redevelopment.
Well, I mean, the Mayor Patrick Morris, has said on the record that redevelopment was a major factor in what caused the city's demise. Both cities, though, have also talked about pensions and employee compensation. What do you think about this notion that it's the employee's fault, it's the employee union's fault? They have been extracting deals that are too rich and too lucrative.
Well, I think it's a combination there as it relates to the unions and relates to elected. It's, you know, in a difficult time, and in years past, what would happen, we can't afford to give you a pay raise this year, but we'll enhance your pension, because that's down the road. Well, down the road is here. The great thing, I think, for us in the county of Los Angeles is we've had a great partnership with our unions. We're in the 3rd year of no raises or cost of living. We didn't get caught up in the pension stuff, 3% at 50 and all the crazy things that were going on. We were able to financially hang in it together. And so we've had this partnership. Yeah, in other parts of the country, and I think in some issues, they've been very generous pension plans, and it's going to have to be revisited.
I do want to ask you about LA County, because it is said that LA County's pension system is one of the most secure. It has a huge number of assets, $40 billion. The contributions from the employees are, one could argue, at an appropriate level. What went right? Well, I mean, first of all, we're not tied into PERS. We have our own program, LACERA. It's at arm's length from the Board of Supervisors, so it can't get caught up in the politics. There are appointed members by us, but there are also elected members by the employees. They've always been prudent in their investment policy. They didn't get caught up in this crazy stuff. And so what's happened, I mean, our investment rate is probably 3 times, even at this point, much better than PERS. So we've been financially sound as it relates to our pension. We didn't get caught up in the crazy stuff as far as future obligations. Our biggest issue that we're going to have to deal with, and probably almost force us into a second-tier kind of a situation of pensions, is retiree health. That is an obligation that we have. We have a very generous plan there. One, obviously, you can't go back on contractually, but at some point, the employees, existing or into the future, will have to pick up a greater share of that cost. So that's the issue on the forefront for us that we're trying to deal with our union partners, to look at that issue, because it's an important issue. But I think, you know, you just can't blame one person. It's a combination on this pension thing. You know, when it becomes very generous, it didn't appear generous at the time, but now when you have unemployment the way it is, and you have all the other financial obligations, everything else looks generous. All right, Don Knabe, we thank you for joining us. He is LA County Supervisor. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thanks for watching Charter California Edition.
Bye.